The moment Ethan Carter stepped into the glass tower, he realized he had walked into the wrong kind of silence, the kind that didn't feel empty but watched, measured, and already deciding things about him he hadn't agreed to. The lobby of Hayes Meridian Enterprises stretched wide and impossibly polished, marble floors reflecting soft white light that made everything feel sharper than it should be at 9 a.m. Ethan adjusted the strap of his worn messenger bag. Suddenly aware of how out of place, he looked among tailored suits and glass reflections that didn't carry even a single flaw. He was only here for one meeting, one signature, one simple freelance contract review that was supposed to take less than 30 minutes. Or at least that's what his email had promised. But nothing about the atmosphere felt temporary. The elevator ride up to the 42nd floor was too quiet, the kind of quiet where even breathing feels like an announcement. Ethan watched the numbers climb, his reflection faint in the steel doors, and tried to convince himself that this was just another client, just another corporate job that would help him cover rent for his small apartment back in Brooklyn. When the doors opened, the executive floor greeted him with a controlled kind of elegance, too clean, too precise, too intentional. A receptionist guided him with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes, leading him toward a conference room with glass walls that overlooked the entire city skyline like a reminder of scale and power. Inside, Ethan was offered water he didn't ask for and a seat at a table that felt slightly too long, as if distance itself was part of the design. He barely had time to open his folder before the air shifted, subtle but undeniable, like a conversation stopping mid-sentence. The door opened without hesitation, and Logan Hayes entered like the room had been built around his arrival. Ethan had seen his face before in articles, business features, headlines that described him as untouchable, calculated, and dangerously efficient, but none of those words captured the quiet weight he carried in person. Logan didn't rush, didn't acknowledge anyone immediately, just looked at the documents on the table as if he already knew every line written there. The board members around Ethan straightened instinctively, and Ethan felt something in the room tighten, not hostile, but focused, like everything had narrowed toward a single point. Logan finally spoke, his voice calm, controlled, and low enough that it forced attention rather than demanded it. And in that moment, Ethan understood something uncomfortable. This meeting wasn't going to end the way it was supposed to. A discussion began, something about public image, timing, and a situation Ethan didn't fully understand yet, but the words blurred together as Logan's gaze occasionally shifted toward him, not invasive, not aggressive, but deliberate in a way that made Ethan sit a little straighter without knowing why. Then, without warning, Logan closed a folder, leaned slightly forward, and said something that made the entire table go still, something that didn't belong in a corporate setting at all. "You'll do." The words were simple, but they landed like a decision already made. Ethan frowned, confused, about to ask what that meant, when Logan continued, calm as ever, as if announcing a business adjustment rather than rewriting the entire direction of Ethan's morning. "You're coming with me." And before Ethan could even process the sentence, before logic could catch up with instinct, he realized this meeting had never been about a contract at all, and whatever was happening now, it had already started without his permission. The silence after those words did not feel like an ending. It felt like something locking into place before Ethan Carter even had the chance to understand what had been decided for him. He stayed frozen for a second too long, watching Logan Hayes as if waiting for someone else in the room to correct the situation, to say this was a misunderstanding, a mistake, anything that would return the world to something recognizable. But no one spoke. The board members avoided his eyes. The receptionist was already opening the door, as if the conversation had moved past the need for consent or discussion. Logan turned first, as if certainty was the only direction he ever followed, and Ethan realized with a slow, rising unease that hesitation was not part of this environment. "I think there has been a misunderstanding," Ethan finally said, grabbing his folder tighter as he stood up, his voice controlled but strained. Logan did not stop walking. He simply replied, calm and measured, "There has not been." That was all. No explanation, no justification, just certainty. Ethan followed anyway, because standing still suddenly felt like losing. The hallway outside the conference room was too quiet again, but now it felt different, less like observation and more like anticipation. They moved toward a private elevator, one Ethan had not seen on the way up, and when the doors closed, the reflection of the two of them stood side by side in polished metal, one dressed in expensive control and authority, the other in confusion, trying to disguise itself as composure. "You cannot just decide things about people like that," Ethan said, turning slightly toward Logan, searching his face for something human enough to argue with. Logan did not look away from the elevator doors. "I did not decide about you. I decided the situation," he said evenly. The elevator descended smoothly, too smoothly, as if even motion had been designed for comfort rather than interruption. Ethan exhaled sharply. "Then I am officially saying no to whatever situation you think I am part of." That made Logan finally glance at him. Just briefly, not offended, not surprised, just assessing, like a variable in a system that had already accounted for resistance. "You can say no," Logan replied, voice still calm. "But it will not change what people believe already happened." The doors opened into a private underground garage, sleek and quiet, with a black vehicle waiting close enough that it felt intentional. Ethan stopped walking. "What are you talking about, people believing what already happened?" he said, frustration starting to break through his careful control. Logan stepped out first, adjusting his coat slightly, as if the conversation was secondary to movement itself. There was a press presence in the building this morning. A photograph was taken. A conclusion was made. It spread faster than corrections could. Ethan stared at him, disbelief rising. "You are telling me I am involved in some kind of public story now because I walked into a meeting I did not agree to?" Logan opened the car door. "You are involved because you were chosen to stabilize it," he said simply. That sentence should have sounded absurd, but the way he said it made it feel like something already in motion. Ethan hesitated, then got into the car because standing outside it felt like refusing to acknowledge gravity. The interior was quiet, leather seats, tinted windows, city lights slipping past like distant signals. Logan sat across from him instead of beside him, which somehow made it worse, as if even proximity was controlled. "We will correct the details later," Logan continued. "For now, you will stay where I can manage the narrative." Ethan let out a short, humorless laugh. "You are talking about me like I am a public relations problem." For the first time, something flickered in Logan's expression, not anger, not softness, but something more precise. "No," he said. "I am talking about you like you are already in it." And as the car pulled away from the building, Ethan realized the part no one had said out loud yet, that whatever this was supposed to look like, it had already started becoming real to everyone except the person who had never agreed to it. The city looked different from inside the car, not because it had changed, but because Ethan Carter was no longer part of it in the way he had been just an hour earlier. Every street they passed felt like it belonged to someone else's decision now, not his. He sat rigid in the back seat, hands still gripping his folder, as if it could somehow anchor him back to a version of the morning that made sense. Across from him, Logan Hayes remained composed, watching nothing in particular, as if the world outside the tinted windows was already accounted for and no longer required attention. "Where are we going?" Ethan asked finally, his voice quieter than he intended, because frustration was starting to mix with something closer to disbelief. Logan did not look at him immediately. "A location where interruptions are minimized," he said. Ethan blinked. "That is not an answer. It is the only one that matters right now," Logan replied calmly. The car turned into a private driveway that Ethan did not recognize, flanked by modern glass architecture that reflected the sky, like it was trying to disappear into it. The gates opened without hesitation. There were no signs, no visible security presence, just quiet precision that suggested everything here was already decided long before arrival. When the car stopped, Ethan hesitated before stepping out, his shoes touching polished concrete that felt more like a statement than a surface. The building ahead was not a typical office space. It looked more like a residence designed with corporate restraint, clean lines, muted tones, and no unnecessary detail. Logan walked ahead without checking if Ethan followed, but Ethan did follow, because at this point not following felt like surrendering control he was not even sure he still had. Inside, the space was quieter than it should have been, softened lighting, high ceilings, and a reception area that felt more like a private residence than a headquarters. A staff member greeted Logan with a slight nod, then disappeared without asking questions. Ethan lowered his voice. This is not temporary housing for a business arrangement. This looks like you expected me to stay. Logan paused at the base of a staircase, finally turning to face him fully. Expectation implies uncertainty, he said. This is not uncertain. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. You keep saying things like they are already decided. I am not part of your company, your plan, or your narrative. Logan studied him for a moment, not dismissive, not aggressive, just steady. You are already visible, he said. That changes what you are allowed to be outside of perception. Ethan shook his head. That is not how reality works. It is how systems work, Logan corrected. There was no raised voice, no tension in his tone, only certainty delivered like structure. Ethan looked away briefly, trying to find logic in something that refused to behave logically. So what now? He asked, more exhausted than angry. I stay here while you manage. A story I never agreed to be part of? Logan stepped slightly closer, just enough that Ethan had to acknowledge him again. You stay here because leaving would create instability, he said. Ethan let out a short breath. You are really good at making control sound like responsibility. For the first time, Logan's gaze shifted slightly, as if that comment landed somewhere closer than intended. Control is not the goal, he said after a pause. Containment is. Ethan stared at him. Containment of what? Logan did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned and began walking again, expecting Ethan to follow. After a moment, Ethan did, because the alternative felt like stepping outside a story that was already halfway written without him. They reached a private suite-like space overlooking the city, glass walls stretching wide enough to make the skyline feel close, but unreachable. Logan finally spoke again, voice lower now, almost measured against the silence. Tomorrow, the public narrative will stabilize, he said. You will be introduced as part of it. Ethan stopped walking. Introduced as what exactly? A pause. Not hesitation, just timing. As necessary, Logan said. And in that moment, Ethan understood the part that had not yet been said out loud, that this was no longer about correcting a misunderstanding, and whatever role he had been pulled into was already being treated as permanent by everyone except him. The quiet inside the glass-walled suite felt heavier than the city below it, as if the height itself had removed Ethan Carter from anything familiar and replaced it with something carefully constructed to hold him in place. He stood near the edge of the living space, staring out at the skyline that now looked less like freedom and more like distance measured in glass and steel. Behind him, Logan Hayes moved with calm efficiency, placing a slim black folder onto a table that already held documents Ethan did not remember agreeing to. Tomorrow morning, Logan said, breaking the silence without ceremony, the public narrative will shift into its stable phase. Ethan turned slightly, still trying to process the fact that his entire life had been reduced to phrases like narrative and phase as if he were part of a system update. You keep saying that word like I am part of a project, Ethan replied, his voice controlled but edged with disbelief. Logan did not react to the tone. He simply opened the folder, revealing printed pages, schedules, and structured outlines that looked disturbingly official. You are part of what is already being observed, he said. The only variable now is how it is explained. Ethan stepped closer without realizing it, eyes scanning the pages, seeing his name placed beside Logan's in context that did not exist before today. This is not explanation, he said. This is fabrication. Logan closed the folder gently. This is management. The distinction landed uncomfortably in the space between them. Ethan looked away for a moment, rubbing a hand across his forehead, as if physical motion could interrupt the situation's momentum. I am not agreeing to any of this, he said again, slower this time, as if repetition might restore control. Logan finally faced him directly. Agreement is not the mechanism being used anymore, he said. That sentence made Ethan stop speaking. There was no threat in Logan's voice, no pressure, only the quiet certainty of someone describing a system already running beyond individual input. A notification chimed softly from Logan's phone. He glanced at it once, then set it aside. By morning, he continued, there will be confirmation statements released through multiple channels. Your presence here ensures consistency across them. Ethan exhaled sharply. My presence here is not something you can just assign meaning to, he said. Logan studied him for a moment longer than before, as if evaluating not resistance, but understanding. Meaning is assigned externally first, he said. Acceptance comes later. Ethan let out a short, humorless breath. You are very confident in how people work. I am confident in how systems respond, Logan corrected. The words should have sounded detached, but instead they carried a precision that made it harder to dismiss them outright. Ethan turned away again, walking a few steps toward the window, staring at the city lights below. If I walk out of here tonight, he said, what happens? A pause followed, not dramatic, just measured. Logan answered calmly. Nothing immediate, he said. But nothing will remain consistent afterward. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. That sounds like a warning. It is a description, Logan replied. Silence settled again, but this time it felt different, less like containment and more like calculation awaiting input. Ethan opened his eyes and turned back. Why me? He asked finally, the question carrying more weight than frustration now. Logan did not answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer to the table, placing one hand lightly on the folder as if grounding the conversation in something physical. Because you were present at the moment the narrative required alignment, he said. Ethan frowned. That is not an answer. Logan looked at him directly. It is the only one that matters at this stage. The words did not resolve anything, but they did something worse. They made the situation feel less like chaos and more like structure Ethan had not been shown the edges of yet. Outside, the city continued moving as if nothing had changed, but inside the suite, Ethan realized he was no longer being asked what he wanted. He was being shown what had already been decided around him, and for the first time since this began, the real question was not how to refuse it, but whether refusal had ever been part of the system at all. Morning arrived without softness, as if the city had already accepted a version of events Ethan Carter had not yet agreed to live inside. The light filtering through the glass walls of the suite was pale and structured, not warm, making everything feel more like preparation than a new day. Ethan had barely slept, sitting on the edge of the sofa for hours, replaying every sentence Logan Hayes had spoken until language itself started to feel like something designed rather than natural. When Logan finally reappeared from the adjacent room, fully composed as if rest was optional, he carried a thin tablet in one hand and a calmness that made Ethan feel increasingly out of sync with reality. You are awake, Logan said simply, as if it were an observation rather than an acknowledgement of exhaustion. Ethan looked up immediately. I was not given many alternatives, he replied. Logan stepped closer and placed the tablet on the table between them. On the screen was a schedule broken into precise intervals, starting from early morning briefings to what was labeled as a public alignment event later that day. Ethan stared at it for a long moment. You cannot be serious, he said quietly. Logan did not respond with emotion. He responded with structure. This is the most efficient correction window, he said. After today, interpretation will stabilize. Ethan stood up fully now, running a hand through his hair in frustration. You keep talking about interpretation like I am part of a media campaign, he said. I am a person, not a narrative adjustment. Logan watched him carefully, not interrupting. In situations like this, perception defines outcome before facts catch up, he said. That is not a choice I created. Ethan laughed once, short and disbelieving. You keep saying that like it makes it better. For a moment, silence stretched between them again, but it was no longer empty. It felt structured, like every pause had purpose. Logan finally spoke again. There will be a controlled briefing in 4 hours, he said. You will be present. Ethan shook his head immediately. No, I will not. Logan's gaze did not change. You will, he repeated, not louder, just certain. Ethan stepped closer to the table, pointing lightly at the schedule. You are not hearing me, he said. I am not participating in this. Logan tilted his head slightly, studying him as if evaluating resistance as a predictable stage rather than an obstacle. Participation is not defined by preference, he said. That sentence made Ethan pause, not because it convinced him, but because it revealed how differently Logan processed reality. Before Ethan could respond, a soft knock came at the suite entrance. Logan turned slightly and opened the door without hesitation. A small team entered quietly, dressed in neutral professional attire, carrying minimal equipment and digital tablets. Ethan immediately stepped back. What is this? He asked. One of them offered a polite smile. We are here to prepare you for the public appearance, she said calmly. Ethan looked at Logan sharply. You brought people here without telling me, he said. Logan replied without turning. Efficiency requires coordination, he said. The team began setting up discreetly, adjusting lighting, reviewing notes, preparing statements. Ethan felt the room shift again, no longer private, no longer negotiable. I am not doing this, he said again, more firmly. Logan finally faced him directly. You are not being asked to perform, he said. You are being guided through consistency. Ethan's frustration sharpened into something more focused now. Guided, he repeated. That is what you are calling this. Logan did not correct him. Instead, he stepped slightly aside, allowing Ethan a clearer view of the city beyond the glass. If you leave now, Logan said calmly, you will enter contradiction immediately. That will increase instability for both of us. Ethan stared out at the skyline, realizing that every option being presented to him came already weighted with consequences he did not design. The room behind him continued preparing, quietly and professionally, as if his resistance had already been accounted for and filed away. And for the first time, Ethan understood the unsettling part was not that Logan was controlling everything, but that everyone else in the room already behaved as if the version of him Logan described was the only one that mattered. The preparation room felt smaller than it should have, not because of its size, but because every surface now carried intention. Ethan Carter stood near the center while the professional team moved around him with calm efficiency, adjusting details he never agreed needed adjusting. The reflection in the mirror showed someone he recognized, but only loosely, like a version of himself translated into someone else's expectations. A stylist checked the collar of his shirt, a communications assistant reviewed talking points on a tablet, and every action was performed with the same quiet certainty that had defined everything since yesterday morning. Ethan finally broke the silence. This is still unnecessary, he said, his voice steady but strained. No one stopped working. One of them responded gently without looking up. It is already scheduled, she said. That phrase again. Scheduled, aligned, prepared, as if his life had entered a calendar he never opened. Logan Hayes stood near the window, reviewing something on his phone, completely unaffected by the controlled movement around them. Ethan stepped closer to him. You are not hearing me, he said. Logan lowered the device and looked at him directly. I am hearing you, he replied. I am choosing not to allow disruption to override timing. Ethan exhaled slowly, frustration tightening his voice. You are treating me like a variable that needs to be stabilized. Logan's expression remained unchanged. Because instability creates expansion of error, he said. Ethan shook his head. I am not an error. That statement finally paused Logan for half a second longer than usual. Not disagreement, not correction, just evaluation. Then he spoke again, quieter but firm. You are not the error, he said. You are the unknown factor in an already public equation. Before Ethan could respond, the assistant approached with a tablet and gently gestured toward the final confirmation steps. We will proceed in 20 minutes, she said. Ethan looked at her, then back at Logan. Proceed with what? He asked, though he already knew the answer would not satisfy him. Logan stepped slightly closer now, lowering his voice so only Ethan could hear. With stabilizing perception before it becomes irreversible, he said. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest again. You keep saying that like I agreed to be part of it, he replied. Logan's gaze held steady. Agreement is not what started this, he said. Visibility did. The word lingered in the space between them longer than expected. Ethan looked away briefly, then back at the room where everything was still moving forward without hesitation, without waiting. If I refuse to speak out there, he said, what happens? Logan did not answer immediately. Instead, he glanced toward the glass wall, where the city stretched beyond them like a distant audience. Then silence. Becomes interpretation, he said. And interpretation becomes fact faster than correction can respond. Ethan let out a slow breath. So no matter what I do, I am already locked into whatever story you decide fits best. Logan turned back to him. Not decided, he corrected. Managed. That word again, precise and unyielding. The team signaled that time was approaching. Ethan felt the weight of the next few minutes settling in, not like pressure from outside, but like structure forming around him whether he moved or not. As they guided him toward the exit, Ethan hesitated one last time, turning slightly toward Logan. This is not control, he said quietly. Logan met his eyes. No, he replied. This is containment until understanding catches up. And as the doors opened toward the waiting space beyond, Ethan realized that whatever he thought this situation was becoming, everyone else had already decided what it would be called. The hallway outside the preparation suite felt longer than it should have, as if distance itself had been redesigned to slow thought. Ethan Carter walked with controlled steps, guided not by choice, but by timing that had already been finalized before he arrived. Ahead of him, the final staging area opened into a softly lit space filled with subtle movement, cameras positioned in quiet readiness, staff speaking in low voices that immediately stopped when Logan Hayes entered the room. Everything reacted to Logan before it reacted to Ethan, and that detail alone was becoming harder to ignore. Ethan stopped just before the marked position on the floor. A coordinator gently gestured for him to step forward, but he hesitated. "I am not doing this as it is presented," Ethan said clearly, his voice carrying through the room more than he intended. The room did not react with surprise. It reacted with adjustment. A brief pause, a glance exchanged between staff members, and then one of them responded calmly. "We are not presenting anything. We are confirming what has already been circulated." Ethan turned toward Logan immediately. "Circulated," he repeated. Logan stood slightly to the side, composed as ever, his expression unchanged. "The preliminary statement was released 10 minutes ago," he said. "Public response is already forming." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest, not panic, but realization that events were moving without requiring his consent to continue. "You released a statement without my approval," he said. Logan corrected him calmly. "We released clarification based on visible engagement." Ethan shook his head, frustration rising but controlled. "There was no engagement," he said. Logan's gaze held steady. "There was perception of engagement," he replied. That distinction settled heavily in the room, because no one contradicted it. The coordinator signaled again, more carefully this time, suggesting final positioning. Ethan did not move. "You are building this entire situation around how things looked for a moment I did not agree to," he said. Logan stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly, so it did not carry beyond them. "Most outcomes begin that way," he said. "Interpretation precedes acknowledgement." Ethan let out a slow breath. "You keep saying interpretation like it overrides truth." Logan paused briefly. "In public systems, it often does." The room waited. Cameras remained still, staff remained ready, and the silence itself felt like part of the structure. Ethan looked around, realizing there was no neutral space left in the room. Everything was already aligned toward continuation. He turned back to Logan. "So what exactly am I supposed to say out there?" he asked, quieter now. Logan did not hesitate. "You are not required to add details," he said. "You are only required to confirm presence." Ethan frowned slightly. "Confirm presence," he repeated. Logan nodded once. "That is sufficient for stabilization." The word again, stabilization, as if he were part of a system that required balancing rather than understanding. Ethan looked toward the cameras briefly, then back at Logan. "And after this," he said, "what happens to me?" Logan met his gaze directly. "After this," he said, "the narrative stops evolving unpredictably." Ethan felt a quiet pressure behind those words, not force, but inevitability. A staff member signaled again. The moment had arrived. Ethan remained still for one more second, realizing that refusal no longer changed direction. It only changed interpretation of resistance. He finally stepped forward into position. Logan followed, standing slightly behind and to the side, not controlling him physically, but framing him within a context that was already prepared. As the cameras activated and light filled the space, Ethan understood with unsettling clarity that this was no longer about what was real or false, but about what the world had already decided it would accept as final. The camera lights were not harsh, but to Ethan Carter they felt unavoidable, like a tension that had already been decided before he ever stepped into position. The room was controlled in a way that made silence feel intentional rather than absent. Every detail, from the spacing of the chairs to the placement of microphones, reinforced a structure Ethan had not agreed to but was now expected to inhabit. Logan Hayes stood slightly behind and to the side, not touching him, not guiding him, but positioned in a way that made it clear this was not a moment of equals, but of roles already assigned. Ethan kept his gaze forward, hands loosely clasped in front of him, trying to maintain composure as the first question was directed not at him, but at Logan. There are reports suggesting this engagement was not planned, a voice from off-camera said. Logan did not hesitate. Plans are defined by outcomes, he replied. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, but he remained still. Another question followed immediately, this time shifting attention toward him. Ethan Carter, can you confirm your current status in relation to Logan Hayes? The wording alone made something in Ethan resist instinctively. He glanced briefly toward Logan, then back toward the cameras. There was a short pause, and in that pause he realized there was no phrasing available that would not already be interpreted for him. Logan's voice came quietly from behind him, calm but precise. You only need to confirm presence, he reminded him. Ethan exhaled slowly. I am here, he said. The words felt too simple for the weight they were expected to carry. The room reacted immediately, not with sound, but with subtle movement from the crew, as if that sentence had completed a required step. Ethan noticed it instantly. Nothing about what he said mattered as much as the fact that he said it at all. A third question came, more pointed. Are you disputing the public statement released earlier today? Ethan opened his mouth slightly, then closed it again. The phrasing was structured in a way that left very little space for truth without consequence. Logan spoke again before Ethan could respond fully. Dispute is not necessary at this stage, he said. Ethan turned his head slightly. You keep answering for me, he said under his breath. Logan replied without looking at him. I am maintaining consistency. That word again. Consistency. As if reality itself required stabilization through repetition. Ethan faced forward again, noticing how the room remained focused on him now, waiting not for a revelation, but for alignment. Is this relationship authentic? Another question came. Ethan felt a brief tension rise in his chest, not emotional, but structural, as if the question itself had been designed to trap any answer into meaning more than it should. Logan stepped half a pace closer, not interrupting the cameras, but shifting presence just enough that Ethan felt it. Answering directly is optional, Logan said quietly. Ethan let out a slow breath. For a moment, he looked at the cameras, then at the floor, then finally forward again. I am present in this situation, he said carefully. There was a pause, then another subtle adjustment from the crew, as if that too had been accepted as sufficient. Logan's expression did not change, but his voice lowered slightly when he spoke again. That is enough for now. The interview continued around them, but Ethan stopped processing individual questions. Instead, he became aware of something more unsettling. Every response, every silence, every hesitation was being absorbed into a structure that did not require his agreement to function. When the final question was asked and the cameras slowly powered down, the room did not relax. It simply transitioned. Ethan finally turned to Logan fully. None of this required my agreement, he said quietly. Logan met his gaze without hesitation. Agreement was never the entry point, he replied. And as the crew began to exit the room in controlled order, Ethan understood that what had just happened was not a confirmation of a story, but the reinforcement of one that had already begun writing itself the moment he became visible within it. The silence after the cameras shut off felt different from everything that had come before it, not empty, but finalized, as if something irreversible had just been recorded into the structure of public understanding. Ethan Carter remained standing in the same position for a few seconds longer than necessary, watching the crew exit in controlled sequences, each movement calm and practiced, like they were leaving behind a completed procedure rather than a moment involving human consequence. Logan Hayes was already speaking with one of the communications staff near the side of the room, reviewing notes on a tablet with the same level of focus he had shown since the beginning, as if nothing had shifted at all. Ethan finally broke the stillness between them. That was not a conversation, he said quietly. Logan did not look up immediately. It was a controlled confirmation, he replied. Ethan let out a short breath of disbelief. You are reducing everything I say into something that fits your structure, he said. Logan closed the tablet and turned toward him fully. Structure is what prevents contradiction from spreading, he said. The words landed with a kind of finality that Ethan was beginning to recognize as intentional rather than casual. Before Ethan could respond, Logan's assistant approached, holding a thin device displaying live updates. She hesitated only briefly before speaking. The first wave of media coverage is already aligning with the statement, she said. Ethan turned his head slightly. Already, he repeated. She nodded once. Engagement confirmation is trending across multiple platforms. The phrase made Ethan pause. Engagement confirmation. Not question, not speculation, but confirmation. Logan stepped closer, glancing briefly at the feed before returning his attention to Ethan. This is the stabilization phase I mentioned, he said. Ethan shook his head slowly. You are talking about my life like it is a system rollout, he said. Logan responded without hesitation. Public interpretation requires synchronization, he said. Ethan looked away for a moment, running a hand over his face as the weight of the situation settled further. I did not synchronize anything, he said. Logan's tone remained steady. You did not need to, he replied. That answer created a silence that lasted longer than any of the previous ones. Ethan finally lowered his hand. So what now, he asked. Logan turned slightly toward the window, where the city stretched outward beneath them, distant and unaffected. Now consistency must be maintained for 72 hours, he said. Ethan frowned. 72 hours of what exactly? Logan looked back at him. Presence without contradiction, he said. Ethan gave a quiet, almost humorless laugh. You are making my existence sound like a scheduled task. Logan did not deny it. Temporary structure prevents escalation, he said. Ethan stepped closer, frustration returning, but more controlled now. And after 72 hours, he asked, what changes? Logan paused briefly, not for uncertainty, but for precision. After 72 hours, he said, perception becomes self-sustaining. Ethan felt something shift in that explanation, not comfort, not relief, but recognition that external control would no longer be necessary once belief stabilized on its own. So I am just supposed to exist inside whatever story you have created until people stop questioning it, he said. Logan met his gaze directly. Until questioning is no longer the dominant response, he corrected. The distinction was subtle but important, and Ethan noticed it immediately. The assistant stepped back quietly, leaving them alone in the room again. Ethan looked toward the table where the interview preparation had taken place, now cleared as if nothing had happened there at all. You keep acting like this is temporary, Ethan said, quieter now. Logan answered without hesitation. All systems begin as temporary solutions, he said. Ethan exhaled slowly, realizing that. Nothing about the past hours had been designed for reversal. Only progression. Only reinforcement. Only alignment. He looked at Logan one more time. And if I decide I do not want to be part of this system anymore, he asked. Logan's expression remained steady, but his answer came with the same calm certainty as everything else. Then you will discover how quickly systems adapt to absence, he said. And in that moment, Ethan understood that the most unsettling part was not what Logan had done, but how easily everything outside of him had already begun treating it as permanent reality. The morning after the 72-hour stabilization window had been formally initiated, Ethan Carter woke to a silence that felt less like rest and more like continuity, as if the world had simply decided to keep moving forward without asking whether he was ready to follow. The suite was already active with controlled motion when he stepped out of the sleeping area, the kind of movement that suggested preparation rather than uncertainty. A tablet had been placed on the table again, this time displaying updates that had accumulated overnight, each line reinforcing the same pattern of narrative reinforcement across media channels. Logan Hayes stood near the window, dressed as if the day had already been structured around him hours before sunrise. He did not turn immediately when Ethan entered the room, as if their timing was no longer required to align. The second phase has begun, Logan said without preface. Ethan approached the table slowly, glancing at the updates without fully committing to reading them. You are speaking about this like it is a scheduled rollout for a product, he said quietly. Logan finally turned toward him. It is a controlled narrative stabilization process, he replied. Ethan exhaled through his nose, frustration restrained but present. That does not make it any less invasive, he said. Logan stepped closer, stopping at a measured distance that still felt intentional rather than casual. Invasive implies external harm, he said. This is internal adaptation to external perception. Ethan looked up sharply. You are describing my life like it is something being adjusted after the fact, he said. Logan did not deny it. Because that is what perception systems do, he said. Ethan shook his head slightly. I am still a person in this, he said. Logan held his gaze for a moment longer than usual. You are the reference point, he corrected. The sentence landed heavily, not as a compliment or insult, but as definition. Before Ethan could respond, the tablet chimed softly again, signaling incoming coordination. Logan glanced at it once, then set it aside. You will be required to appear in a controlled public interaction later today, he said. Ethan frowned. Another one, he asked. Logan nodded once. This time, the context will be informal reinforcement, he said. Ethan rubbed his forehead briefly. You keep inventing categories for everything I experience, he said. Logan's tone remained steady. Categories reduce unpredictability, he replied. Ethan looked toward the glass wall again, watching the city below as it moved without acknowledging anything that had changed for him. What happens if I refuse again, he asked. Logan answered without hesitation. Refusal becomes part of the pattern, he said. Ethan turned back slowly. That is not an answer that gives me any control, he said. Logan stepped slightly to the side, gesturing toward the living space as if inviting Ethan to observe the structure of the environment itself. Control is distributed across systems, he said, not isolated in individual decisions. Ethan let out a quiet breath. So I never had it to begin with, he said. Logan did not confirm or deny it. Instead, he said, you have influence within defined parameters. Ethan stared at him for a moment, realizing how carefully every explanation avoided granting or denying autonomy outright. A soft notification sounded from another device in the room, followed by a brief message from external coordination confirming media readiness for the next appearance window. Ethan felt the weight of repetition building again, not as pressure but as inevitability. This does not stop, does it? He asked quietly. Logan met his eyes directly. It evolves, he said. Ethan looked down briefly, then back up. And I am expected to evolve with it, he said. Logan's answer was calm, precise, and unchanged. You are already part of its trajectory, he said. And in that moment, Ethan understood that the most difficult part was not what was being done to him, but the realization that the world outside had already begun moving forward as if his participation had never been optional at all. The room felt different again that afternoon, not because anything had changed in its structure, but because Ethan Carter had begun to recognize how quickly structure itself could become routine. The suite, once unfamiliar, now carried a quiet predictability, as if even uncertainty had been scheduled into intervals. Logan Hayes stood by the central table reviewing a series of updates on a slim device, his expression unchanged, his focus absolute. Ethan watched him for a moment before speaking, realizing he had begun measuring time not by hours, but by Logan's transitions between decisions. You are treating this like it is already permanent, Ethan said quietly. Logan did not look up immediately. It is stable, he replied. Ethan stepped closer. Stable does not mean permanent, he said. Logan finally set the device down. In public systems, stability determines permanence, he said. Ethan exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. You keep separating things in a way that removes choice from the conversation, he said. Logan met his gaze directly. Choice is preserved within structure, he replied. The answer was calm, practiced, and unchanged from every previous explanation, and that repetition itself was beginning to feel like a form of logic Ethan was being pushed to accept rather than understand. Before Ethan could respond, a notification chimed from the main display. Logan glanced at it briefly, then turned it toward Ethan. A live update feed showed increasing public engagement with their presence together, not as speculation anymore, but as established context being repeated across multiple channels. Headlines referenced consistency, continuity, and confirmation, each word reinforcing the same direction regardless of origin. Ethan stared at it for a long moment. This is happening. Without me saying anything further, he said quietly. Logan nodded once. That is the purpose of stabilization, he replied. Ethan looked up sharply. You are removing me from my own involvement in this, he said. Logan's tone remained steady. You are not being removed, he said. You are being positioned. Ethan let out a short, controlled breath. Positioned for what? He asked. Logan stepped slightly toward the window, as if observing the city could provide additional context to the explanation. For recognition without disruption, he said. Ethan frowned. That is not a human explanation, he said. Logan turned back toward him. It is a functional one, he replied. The distinction lingered in the air between them longer than before. Ethan glanced at the table again, noticing new entries being added in real time, coordination notes, timing adjustments, and references to upcoming controlled visibility moments. How many of these are there going to be? Ethan asked. Logan answered without hesitation. Until response patterns stabilize across all channels, he said. Ethan shook his head slightly. You are talking about people reacting to me like I am part of a system they are supposed to accept, he said. Logan corrected him calmly. They are reacting to continuity, he said. Ethan paused, then spoke more quietly. And I am just supposed to exist inside that continuity, he said. Logan met his eyes. You are already inside it, he replied. That answer was no longer surprising, but it still carried weight. Ethan looked away toward the glass wall, where the city stretched outward without awareness of any of this. For a moment, he realized the most unsettling part was not the visibility itself, but the absence of any point where it could be cleanly undone. If I stop participating entirely, he asked finally, what changes? Logan did not immediately respond. When he did, his voice remained calm. The system will adjust interpretation accordingly, he said. Ethan turned back slowly. So even my absence becomes part of your structure, he said. Logan did not deny it. And in that silence, Ethan understood that nothing in this situation required his continued agreement anymore, because whatever had already begun no longer depended on permission to continue moving forward. The day had moved forward without acknowledging hesitation, as if time itself had adopted the same certainty Logan Hayes imposed on every system he touched. Ethan Carter stood near the glass wall again, but this time the view of the city no longer felt distant in a comforting way. It felt observed, as if every movement outside had already been categorized and quietly included in the structure he was now unable to step outside of. Logan was seated at the central table, reviewing final coordination notes for what had been described as another controlled public interaction window. The room was quieter than before, but it was not absence of activity. It was completion of preparation. Ethan finally spoke, his voice lower than usual. How long does this continue? He asked. Logan did not look up immediately. Until continuity is self-sustaining without reinforcement, he replied. Ethan let out a slow breath. You keep using words like continuity and stability as if they replace the fact that this is my life, he said. Logan set the device down and turned toward him. Your life is not being replaced, he said. It is being integrated. Ethan frowned. Integrated into what? He asked. Logan paused briefly, not for uncertainty, but for precision. Into a framework that no longer depends on correction, he said. That answer made Ethan stop for a moment longer than he intended. Not because it was new, but because it was increasingly consistent. Ethan walked closer to the table, looking at the remaining updates still visible on the screen. Each one reflected the same pattern, repetition across platforms, alignment across narratives, confirmation without contradiction. You are building something that cannot be reversed, Ethan said quietly. Logan met his gaze. Reversal is not a required function once stabilization is achieved, he replied. Ethan shook his head slightly. That is exactly what is wrong with how you think about this, he said. Logan's expression remained unchanged. It is not thinking, he said. It is structure. The word hung in the air again, heavier each time it was repeated. Ethan looked away briefly, then back toward him. If I step out of this completely, he said, what happens to the structure you are talking about? Logan answered without delay. It adjusts, he said. Ethan frowned. And what happens to me in that adjustment? He asked. Logan's voice remained calm, almost clinical. You become absence within the same framework, he said. Ethan exhaled slowly, realizing how every answer still avoided any version of release or return. He glanced at the glass wall again, where the city continued its ordinary movement, unaware of the systems being described inside this room. So there is no version of this where I am simply not part of it anymore, he said quietly. Logan stepped slightly closer, not reducing distance in a forceful way, but in a way that made avoidance less natural. Not without creating instability, he said. Ethan looked at him directly now. You are treating instability like it is worse than erasing someone's autonomy, he said. Logan responded after a brief pause. I am treating instability as something that spreads, he said. Silence followed again, but it was no longer neutral. It felt like conclusion preparing itself. Ethan finally spoke again, his voice quieter now. At what point does this stop being correction and start being something else? He asked. Logan held his gaze for a moment longer than before. It stopped being correction when visibility became permanent, he said. Ethan stood still, absorbing that answer in a way that did not offer resolution, only confirmation of direction. And for the first time since this began, he understood that the situation was no longer moving toward explanation, but toward completion, whether he participated in it or not. The final stage did not feel like an ending. It felt like the moment a system stops waiting for input and begins operating entirely on its own logic. Ethan Carter stood in the same suite where everything had begun to feel increasingly irreversible, but now even the idea of reversal felt abstract, as if it belonged to a version of reality that no longer had access to him. The city beyond the glass continued its usual rhythm, distant and indifferent, while inside the room, Logan Hayes reviewed the final status updates with calm precision. There was no urgency in his movements, only completion. Ethan finally broke the silence, his voice quieter than before. So this is it, he said. Logan looked up from the device slowly. This is stabilization completion, he replied. Ethan let out a short breath, almost disbelieving. You are speaking like this entire process has reached an endpoint that does not require me anymore, he said. Logan stepped closer to the table, placing the device down with deliberate control. Your presence is no longer required for validation, he said. Ethan frowned slightly. That sounds like I am being phased out of my own situation, he replied. Logan shook his head once. You are being integrated into the finalized structure, he said. Ethan paused, then looked toward the glass wall again, as if expecting the city to provide some alternative explanation. And what does that mean for me going forward? He asked. Logan did not answer immediately. When he did, his tone remained unchanged. It means interpretation has settled, he said. Ethan turned back slowly. Interpretation settled, he repeated. Logan nodded. Public response has reached equilibrium, he clarified. Ethan exhaled, realizing that every term being used had moved further away from anything personal and closer to something operational. So I am no longer a variable, Ethan said quietly. Logan met his gaze directly. You are no longer unstable within the system, he replied. That sentence did not feel like reassurance. It felt like classification. Ethan took a slow step back, then another, processing what had changed without anything visibly changing at all. If everything is stable now, he said, why does it still feel like I am inside something I did not choose? Logan's expression softened only slightly, not emotionally, but in recognition of completion. Because choice was never the defining mechanism here, he said. Ethan looked at him for a long moment, searching for something that could be interpreted differently, something that might offer an alternate framing. But there was none. Only consistency, only structure, only finalized interpretation. So what happens next? Ethan asked finally. Logan turned slightly toward the window again, as if acknowledging the system beyond the room rather than the moment within it. Next, he said, the system continues without requiring adjustment. Ethan's voice lowered. And me? He asked. Logan turned back to him. You remain as established context, he said. The words settled heavily, not as an explanation, but as definition. Ethan stood still, no longer arguing, no longer trying to correct phrasing that had already stopped being negotiable. Outside, the city moved forward in complete ignorance of the structure that had just locked itself into place. Inside, Ethan Carter finally understood that nothing in this process had ever been about a beginning or an end. It had only ever been about reaching a point where continuation no longer required permission from the one person who thought he was being asked to decide at all.